Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk KFYO. Joining us on the phones right now, always a pleasure to visit with our next guest, the Acting Deputy Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security, Ken Cuccinelli, joining us here on the Chad Hasty Show. Acting Deputy Secretary, good morning. How are you today?
Chad, how are you? I'm very well. I hope you are.
Absolutely. Doing fantastic. Appreciate you joining us today. There's so many places that we could start, and I think, one of those that so many people have been paying attention to, I know you have, the Department of Homeland Security has been, and it's something that the President has been talking about a lot, and that is law and order in the United States, something that we have seen break down in some of our major cities.
Yeah, and seriously so. And one of the worst parts of it is the encouragement it's been getting from so much of the left-wing political leadership, as if this is an acceptable tactic in American discourse and American policy discussions. Violence has always been across the line until the last 4 months, and you see people like the Speaker of the House of Representatives calling out law enforcement officers doing their job, not in one of the incidents like the George Floyd killing or something, but just keeping the peace in Portland as stormtroopers using Nazi illusions. Whose side are you on, Madam Speaker? And it seems she's on the side of violent rioters, and she's not alone. That's gone on across the country, even the mayor of Portland so critically. We have so many of these folks in positions of responsibility, and the first responsibility of government is safety in the community you're responsible for, that are abandoning that responsibility. But the president's been pushing on them very hard to use the legal authorities they have and to use the resources they have, like the National Guard, to keep the peace. And that's his goal, is just that simple, peace in every American community.
Why would a mayor or a governor refuse the help of the National Guard?
That's an excellent question. The only one I've been able to generate is political, they care more about political virtue signaling to, frankly, violent, evil, rioting people than they do keeping their communities safe. And, I think overwhelmingly in these communities, even someplace as crazy as Portland, the average Portlander, and just like the average American, wants peace in their community and would much rather see that level of enforcement used that's needed to achieve peace. And frankly, it isn't very hard. I mean, last night was a, quote, big night for protesters in Portland. There were 400 of them. If Governor Brown of Oregon would simply use some portion of her 7,800 National Guardsmen, you could, I guarantee you, just like we saw in Kenosha, you could enforce the peace.
Yeah, they just don't want to.
That's right. And the president keeps pushing and pushing and pushing. And in the case of Kenosha, the president was pushing Governor Evers. He rebuffed the president. And that night, people were killed. There was more violence. He thought, maybe the president got that one right and I got it wrong. The next day, he came back, accepted the president's offer of bringing National Guardsmen in from other states to supplement Wisconsin's. And what happened? Peace. Yeah. That's what happened.
I want to ask you about one or two things that came up in the debate. First is Joe Biden. He called himself, he's the head of the Democrat Party. He's former vice president. Normally, when a former vice president, even if they're not running for president, you would pick up the phone if a former vice president calls you. He says that he has no authority, and they're not going to listen to me or anything else. Do you buy that? If Joe Biden were to call the mayor of Portland and ask them to do something, do you think the mayor of Portland would listen to Joe Biden?
I don't know whether he would, but I can't imagine the call wouldn't be answered, right?
Go to voicemail.
That's right. And I would just note that there are lots of prominent people who are weighing in. Athletes come to mind as I've stopped watching sports. And their opinions by many of these left-wingers are given credence. They freedom. So I can't imagine that if someone as prominent as a former vice president came calling on the subject of the day that was not some minor item about which road to pave, but violence in our community, that wouldn't be given serious consideration. I will say there's a lot of I'll just use Mayor Wheeler in Portland. He doesn't understand his own circumstances 4 months later. So this summer, he went out to talk to these mobs as if they were his friends, his allies, as if he could control them. Let's get to the main point. And what happened during the course of his remarks there in front of the federal courthouse that we were protecting? They rioted. His own police had to declare a riot, and he is the chief of police in addition to being the mayor, as that's one of the duties of the mayor. They were putting up on the wall in laser light next to him that he should resign. What I think of in history is when the socialists took over Russia 100 years ago, and they didn't think much of the Bolsheviks. Well, they thought they were too crazy, too bloodthirsty, all those things. And those were all true. But their problem was not taking them seriously. And Mayor Wheeler is like those people 100 years ago. The rioters are bloodthirsty, America-hating, and make no mistake about that, America-hating, violent, evil people. And they need to be dealt with as you would any other evil person in your community who's willing to commit violence, and that's to meet them with the appropriate force to deter them from ever crossing that line in the first place. And that's what the president has been advocating all over the country.
The president talks about Antifa. The former vice president said Antifa is not a real organization. Which is it? To me, it seems like Antifa is a pretty real organization out there. And what is the Department of Homeland Security doing about these angry mobs? They're not peaceful rioters at all.
So I don't know what the former vice president may or may not have said, but Jerry Nadler, chairman of Judiciary, said Antifa is not real on the floor of the House. And, that's, while it's hard to nail down, the idea that it isn't real is ludicrous. I mean, that's a fantasy world.
Right.
They may organize in local batches instead of there being some national organization. And let's face it, they use anonymity as a tactic. That's why they dress in this black bloc. They all dress the same so they can't be told apart one from the other. So it's harder to arrest them, to do things like that, to respond to their violence. So they use these tactics, and they use it at what I'll call the organization level. They don't establish a formal organization in the sense that most of us think of that. So it makes the effort to corral the illegal, criminal, violent planning and execution much more difficult to get our arms around. Now, having said that, there are hundreds of federal investigations running right now. Now, that's led by the Department of Justice. The FBI has got primary authority for domestic terrorism and things like that. But we are involved in those, particularly Homeland Security investigations, where it matches our jurisdiction. And those things take time. I know your listeners are good Americans, and we Americans want everything done yesterday. But criminal investigations done right don't happen overnight, especially when you have so many of them running at the same time.
Right.
So,
and you have a political party encouraging it.
Well, like I said, I've never seen a situation of rampant violence like this where there's so much encouragement for the violence by so many in power, and to the great destructiveness of America. And I think they've done permanent harm to the idea of cities, to living in cities, to doing business in cities. I think cities as a concept is taking a hit. I think we're going to, when we go forward a year or two and look back, you're going to see a minor exodus from a number of these cities of people who've just thrown in the towel on them.
Do you fear violence around the election?
Well, it's my job to be worried about violence all the time, everywhere. And so anytime there is an event I'll use an example recently, the indictments or the grand jury results in Louisville, Kentucky.
Right.
No matter how that came out, there was going to be violence, right? So it's like, I'll use a different analogy, being a UVA engineer. When your team makes it to the Final Four or wins the national championship, or the NBA championship or baseball or whatever, win or lose, it's like there's party rioting that goes on.
Right.
Why is that? That makes no sense. So when you got something as focused on everyone's calendar as the election, we certainly are concerned about it. I will not say we have specific intelligence of particular threats. And I would also note that the federal government is purposefully and lawfully excluded from the execution of the elections themselves. So you're not going to see federal officers standing at polling places unless we have specific intelligence about a particular threat. But you aren't just going to see us acting like general police officers. That's not what the Constitution or the law provide for. And in the absence of a civil rights threat, which threat to voting would be, which is be handled by the FBI, you won't see us engaged in that way. That's up to the state and local authorities to police.
Real quickly, I know, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, but when it comes to drug cartel operations, what's the latest on the Department of Homeland Security taking that on?
Oh well, we've never stopped taking that on, and we in the last 4 years have seized over 4 million pounds of hard drugs, things like fentanyl, hard drugs, not marijuana, which is about as much as was seized in the 8 years prior to that.
Wow.
That's quite a performance improvement, and obviously to the benefit of America. When you looked at the COVID period, and we're still in it, we're not out of it, but the drug cartels couldn't get their stuff into the United States as easily. So street prices all over the country doubled. I keep tabs on, street cop friends all over the country, and I was getting the same feedback back. It was basically doubling. And it's good to hurt those guys. They're the most evil, vicious, dangerous people in the Western Hemisphere. And this president has, taken steps that make their lives harder and make their business harder. And we look forward to continuing to turn that heat up over the next 4 years.
Keep up the great work. We're visiting with the Acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, Ken Cuccinelli. Appreciate your time as always. And like I said, keep up the great work.
Thanks very much. Appreciate you.
Thank you. That's Secretary Ken Cuccinelli here on the Chad Hasty Show. Good update on law and order here in the U.S. and also Antifa. Joe doesn't believe it's real. Joe, it's just an idea out there. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO.